Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the podcast. New listeners, old listeners, wherever you are in the world, it is so great to have you here back for another episode, back for our very first official YouTube video, our very first filmed episode. It has been a long time coming. You guys have all been so patient and you have been asking for it, but I have been very hesitant about doing YouTube. Like, I'm a podcast, I'm an audio girly first. You guys know when I started the Psychology of Your 20s, I obviously started it as a podcast, not a YouTube channel, for a reason. And I've just been nervous about doing this. But as I've gained more confidence, more skill, this just kind of felt like the natural next step to keep sharing with those of you in your 20s who are struggling with the same things that I am. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be re-releasing some of my favorite episodes for this first little bit, including this episode, The Psychology of Imposter Syndrome. And then going forward, I think what my plan is to do 20-minute versions of our long form episodes for you guys to enjoy. The 1 hour long Psychology of Your 20s episodes that you guys have come to expect, they are not going anywhere. But I want to use this YouTube channel to kind of make those longer pieces that might be a little bit inaccessible to some people more short and have this like kind of bite form taste to them. So you can get all the headline arguments, facts, theories, science from YouTube, from where we are right now. To mark the beginning of this new chapter, I thought that we would throw it back to my first ever episode of The Psychology of Your 20s, The Psychology of Imposter Syndrome. That was my first ever episode. And honestly, I feel kind of emotional returning to it because back then I had no idea how big this podcast would become. And at the time, beginning this new thing, my imposter syndrome was quite significant, I would say. Like, I had no idea how this was going to turn out, that it would end up being what it is. It would end up being my full-time job. I was starting it as this like fresh-faced baby. And I remember putting out my first ever episode of the podcast and thinking, everyone is going to realize that I have no right to be here. Everyone is going to realize that I am a complete fraud. You know what? Could still happen. Some days I'm still waiting for people to wake up and be like, why did we give her a podcast? Like, what gives her the right? Like, is she really that good at this? Like, I think even some part of me as well keeps being like, oh, this is just luck. And luck is something that can run out, obviously. If you have imposter syndrome, this train of thinking, I think, is probably not uncommon to your own brain. And again, I feel like I have kind of proved those self-doubts wrong in a sense. I've kind of got imposter syndrome, I would say 50% of the time, under my control. So let's get into the psychology of imposter syndrome. Okay, I'm going to take you somewhere with me. I am sure at some point in time, we have all been scrolling LinkedIn. We have been scrolling LinkedIn like good career folk, good 20-somethings, good focused 20-somethings that we are. And we have come across a post, an individual, a job announcement that has made us feel completely incompetent and behind in regards to our own goals. It's probably also made us really question whether we are deserving of what we have right now, considering there are all these super impressive people and all of them have their life, entirely in order. They deserve their success, whilst we're unimpressive. We might be successful, but we've kind of tricked our way into getting here. This, my friends, that is imposter syndrome. You believe you are a fraud. One of the best definitions of imposter syndrome that I've come across ever when researching was from this author, an artist, and his name is Austin Kleon. He has done a lot of work on imposter syndrome. He's probably had a lot of lived experience with imposter syndrome, particularly operating in the art world. But the way he put it was pretty spot on. Imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomena in which we are unable to internalize our accomplishments. We know they exist. We know that from the outside, people might think our lives are great. We cannot accept that. You attribute it to something beyond you, But it's never your work. It's never your dedication. It's never your talent that is to blame, I guess. You're kind of just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for everyone else to figure it out, to be ousted. If you want to truly understand imposter syndrome, though, you basically have to know where the term came from. That context and that history is actually quite essential, I think, to explaining this as a psychological condition. So the term was discovered by two psychologists, Susan Ims and Pauline Rose Clance, back in the 1970s. And what they were studying was initially confidence in successful women. And I think, if my memory serves me right, they were kind of doing almost like an employment survey of women who had kind of made it, who had this incredible professional success. The people they interviewed were doctors. Some of them had multiple master's degrees. Some of them were tenured professors. All of these women were really incredible. And yet, when they sat down and interviewed them and said, can you give us like the guideline, the guidebook to your success? All of them were like, oh, well, it was an administrative error. It was a mistake. Something went wrong. I'm not meant to be here. And from that, the term imposter syndrome was created, and it was exclusively applied to successful women in their fields back in the 70s and 80s that felt like the only reason they were there was because of some mass human error or a mistake. Nowadays, we understand that it's not just felt by people who are women, and it's also not just felt by people who are typically successful, but people at every stage of the process, or every kind of person who has aspirations of succeeding. It's a lot bigger than that piece of research, is what I'm trying to say. It's something that the world and the internet has taken on, and it's become part of what we now call collective psychobabble. It's one of those rare psychology terms that makes it into like our everyday vocabulary. I will say, I'm saying psychology term. That doesn't mean that it's an official diagnosis listed in the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 is this big manual of mental disorders and psychological disturbances. And I think at this time, psychologists and even psychiatrists, yes, they acknowledge that imposter syndrome is real and that it does cause distress and has issues. And it's a very intellectual form of self-doubt that doesn't necessarily make it a disorder. In fact, it's probably more commonly just a natural part of the human experience. You know what we haven't talked about is what it feels like. So I'm going to give you a little list of what imposter syndrome feels like. See if you can find yourself in this definition. So persistent self-doubt, even if there is evidence that you are doing well, feeling like a fraud or like you have tricked someone, tricked your boss, tricked your colleagues, attributing your success to luck, timing, even other people, fear of being found out, like you could make one mistake and it's going to expose you as incompetent. So there's a lot of perfectionism involved in that as well, a lot of walking on eggshells, and a big part of imposter syndrome that I've specifically noticed in 20-somethings is overworking to compensate for your belief that you need to do more to prove yourself. Essentially, you are thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky I'm here. I better not screw it up. I better prove to everyone, most of whom don't even have doubts about you, that they made the right decision. The final element of imposter syndrome is comparison. Comparing yourself to others and always coming up short in your own mind. Which is quite funny because in my mind, the way I think about comparison is actually quite circular. It's not a ladder where someone's at the bottom and there's someone at the top and the bottom person compares themselves to this person who compares themselves to this person. You kind of get where I'm going. I actually see it as a circle. Here you are. You're comparing yourself to Amy. Amy's comparing herself to Nancy. Nancy is comparing herself to Muhammad, and Muhammad is comparing himself to you. That's the loop. That's how comparison operates. And the only way to get out of that is to either see it clearly as a circle and as a cycle, or to think something differently and branch out. So I want to come back to that first symptom, actually, feeling like a fraud even in the face of evidence. So there have been some studies that suggest imposter syndrome is almost what we would call a syndrome of delusion, because our self-doubt is so strong that it allows us to ignore reality, the reality of what we have done and what we can do. So I want to talk about this hypothetical. You could approach someone with imposter syndrome on the street and you could show them a resume of accomplishments and of impressive things, not all necessarily even professional. And you could ask them, what do you think of this resume? Do you think this person is impressive? And they might say, wow, they really are, truly, like they're doing amazing things, not realizing it's their own resume. And then as soon as you say to them, oh, by the way, like here's the name, we're going to uncover the name, it's you, John Smith, Jane Smith, whoever, they would immediately change their opinion and become quite dismissive. That's why we call it a syndrome of delusion. Forbes magazine has even labeled imposter syndrome as being the realm and the environment of the high achiever. Because imposter syndrome, funnily enough, is actually more associated with people who put a lot of pressure on themselves, so who objectively probably have less reason to doubt their success because they've most likely worked really hard for it. Let's talk about why that's the case. We need to talk about where imposter syndrome comes from. So there's a few prominent theories. My favorite is, of course, coming from the original discoverers of imposter syndrome. So Susan Ims, Pauline Clance. These were the women we talked about before who discovered imposter syndrome amongst high achieving women. And they essentially realized that amongst these women, there is a cycle. And this cycle explains why imposter syndrome comes to be. In the first stage of the cycle is when imposter syndrome really begins. And it's when an individual like you and I begins to feel these initial feelings of anxiety. And instead of thinking that anxiety is coming from me, we think that anxiety is coming because of a task that's emerging because of something I feel I need to get done. So we would call the task the trigger for our imposter syndrome. The second stage is this person sets out to do this task and they feel like they have to do it the very best. It needs to be perfect. This is where perfectionism comes in, which is actually the sister of procrastination. If you feel like you can't do something perfectly, you feel beholden to this idea of failure. And so you procrastinate as a way to avoid perhaps secretly having to encounter this feeling. A lot of people will also encounter a lot of extreme preparation, feeling like they have to do everything before they get to the start line. And like I kind of mentioned, this is what creates a lot of the initial feelings of fear in approaching the task because your expectations upon yourself are so high. So the next stage is the Superman or Superwoman phase. Now that you have committed to the idea that you have to do this thing and it has to be the very best, and you've prepared and you're finally at the start line, here is where you overwork. Here is where you try and take on some kind of superhuman ability. You don't need sleep. You don't need socialization. You don't need to eat. You're going to do everything to propel yourself to be the very best at this. This is met with stage 4, which is the fear of failure. Inevitably, you will push through the fear of failure. You will realize that you have no other option but to complete the task. And that is when you enter the final stage, stage 5. You've completed the task. It probably is amazing. Now you have to deny and discount praise. You have to continue believing that that wasn't you who did that. Why do we do this? I have no clue. Honestly, I've thought about it a lot. I think maybe it's because we've learnt that humility is something that is praised in our society. Maybe because deep down we realize that we need our self-doubt to motivate us. If we genuinely did see ourselves as competent and capable and deserving of our success, we would no longer have this cruel motivator that could get us to work so hard. Some people even experience a 6th stage of this cycle, and that is the guilt about success. For example, if success is unusual amongst your family or your peers, as an imposter, you might actually feel more distant from others in your life, and you feel overwhelmed by the fact that you have done so well. And so in order to not be seen as the outlier or too different from your family or your friends, again, you continue to discount it and to feel quite guilty for the fact that you have had this luck and these opportunities that you are attributing to your success. Let's talk about the next theory of why we experience imposter syndrome. And it has to do with the big P word, personality. It is the result of your disposition. Specifically, it's to do with a cluster of personality traits known as neuroticism. And if you are familiar with the big five, you will know that neuroticism is one of the big five. Neuroticism is basically a trait that often predicts anxiety. Like, anxiety is another word to describe this. The more anxiety you have, the higher in neuroticism you are, the more often this will predict self-consciousness, emotional instability, lower self-esteem, and a higher desire to prove ourselves, but also an equal sense of never being enough. It all comes down to personality. And personality in itself is a combination of nature and nurture. The pressure that has been put on you by family, by parents, by teachers, peers, by yourself, and also just who you were born as. There was actually a piece of research done in Germany, and it was a twin study, and it did find that imposter syndrome is highly correlated to personality. But within personality, it has a greater correlation to people who, we would say from birth, were more neurotic. I know I'm saying this and you're probably like, okay, great, cool. Another thing I can't change. I'm neurotic. I'm anxious. Is this just always going to be a part of me? And the answer is no, it's not. Because there is proof and there is evidence that we can actually change our personality, but we can also, more importantly, change the symptoms of our personality that we don't particularly like, such as this constant self-doubt that you and I are most likely battling at the moment. I also want to remind you, this is just a theory. So often people encounter psychological theories that have a scientific backing and they think, well, that must be true. Look at all this research. Look at these very smart people talking about this. That's my diagnosis. That explains everything. A theory is still a theory. Even the most well-researched theories, even those that have every piece of evidence that could ever be asked for, still have exceptions, still have people who break the mold. So what I'm saying is every single one of these things could have been stacked up against you. So you could have had the high pressure family system and early childhood environment. You could have had a neurotic personality. You could have experienced that cycle, that 6-stage cycle we were talking about before. And you actually might not have imposter syndrome. Or, more importantly, it's something that you will be able to address. The next natural question we face is, what do we do about all this? The imposter in our minds cannot win in this situation because it's actually not real. It's part of us. We are real. We are the ones living. We are the ones experiencing life. Your imposter is, whatever it is, it's trying to sabotage you. Maybe it's trying to save you. We'll never know. It cannot, though, have the final say on the direction of your life because you are actually in control of it. You are actually the one who it is originating from. Knowing that, here are my 3 biggest tips for dealing with imposter syndrome and taking back agency over this saboteur in your life. My first tip, it's one of surrender. Let the thoughts come. Don't fight them. Don't push them away. Understand that they are going to pop up, but you don't have to invest in them more than just acknowledging their existence. What's more than that? You can acknowledge their existence. You can also argue back. Like, you can say, hey, I actually don't believe that. Sorry, I don't believe what you're telling me. If that initial thought has come from you, a more accurate one can come from you as well. You can, and you do have the ability to not agree with every thought that comes from your mind. Secondly, and this is something I do to this day, tip 2, imagine the words of your imposter syndrome in the voice of like your childhood bully or the nasty colleague who you want to prove wrong. engage in this visualization. Like when this voice in your head is saying, you don't deserve this, they're going to figure you out, like you are nothing but a failure. Imagine that voice in the body of someone who you don't want to be and who you do not admire. I actually always imagine Wormtail from Harry Potter, because I'm like, he just screams like ickiness to me, and he screams like yuck. And so if I imagine my imposter is speaking from this character, from his mouth, I'm like, I'm not listening to that guy, even though he's fictional. That visualization, that like negative visualization of your imposter, it's so powerful because it stops you from putting, again, this initial thought on a pedestal. And it stops you from thinking, I have to believe what you're telling me. Tip 3, I want you to keep a list of accomplishments that have nothing to do with traditional professional success. That could include things like your pursuit for the best chocolate cake, how you made someone on the train feel, the good deeds that you are doing, the fact that you make cool things, the fact that you throw amazing dinner parties, the fact that you're a good friend, you're a good sister, you're a good brother. Make a list of things that have nothing to do with grades, wealth, status, success, promotions, whatever it is that you are judging yourself based on. Invest in the parts of you that perhaps previously haven't been validated, and appreciate that, yes, you are an amazing person, but you are an amazing person without the traditional forms of tangible success that everyone can see. The best way to fight back against your imposter is to really say, hey, you are telling me that my entire worth is based on these elements of my personhood and these elements of who I am. And so if those elements of who I am are not real or aren't as truthful as I thought they were, that means that I'm not worthy as a person. You can argue with those elements and say, no, I am worthy as a person because I do deserve those successes. That's one way to do it, and it's an effective way to do it. Or you can say, okay, I might not be worthy of those successes. Maybe I did lie and didn't realize it. Maybe I am a fraud. Maybe people are going to figure me out. But here is this entire rich inner life that I have, separate to all of those things, that means so much more. So who cares about that stuff? Sure, take it away. I'm going to be fine anyways. Those are the parts that I need you to continue investing in, even as we face mounting hustle culture, even as the drive to success that probably feels, built into your DNA is pushing you to do more. Pause, stop. What makes you human? What makes you individual? What makes you someone that you would actually want to be around, that has nothing to do with whatever someone can find on your LinkedIn profile? Finally, my 4th tip, we need to form a more positive relationship with failure. We are what one Stanford University professor called failure deprived. Us as a generation, we are failure deprived for a couple of reasons. 2 reasons actually. The first being that we don't have as many opportunities for real life failure. Perhaps we are slightly too coddled. That was his suggestion. The second part being, because we are too coddled, it means that failure is a more rare experience, so it takes on a more severe tone. The things that you are not exposed to are naturally going to feel scarier to you because you don't have experience in dealing with them. That is the role that failure has taken up. So I need you to understand that failure is not a nasty word. It is not a bad thing. Not being the success that you thought you were going to be, not feeling like you are deserving. Yes, that feels terrible, but there's also a lesson contained in that. And there is also more growth that is going to come from a setback than is going to come from a success. So whatever happens, you are fully capable and able to deal with it, because you are going to have the attitude that every single experience, good or bad, imposter or not, sabotage or not, is a worthwhile one. And all of it is allowing you to know yourself better, to know this version of yourself better who is going to grow through the self-doubts and grow through the challenges. I think that's all we have time for, my lovely listeners. That's a wrap on our first ever video episode. I'm going to break the fourth wall here and say I thought that was going to be a lot harder than it was. I actually really enjoyed this. I had a great time chatting to you guys this way. It actually felt a lot more meaningful and personal. So this being a new thing that I'm doing, I'm so open to feedback. I'm open to criticism. Maybe I will regret saying that, but if there's something you think would be a great addition to this new video format, if there's something we could do better, lighting, camera quality, maybe you don't like the fact that this plant probably isn't meant to be here, which it's not, let me know, leave a comment down below. And I'm just so excited for this next chapter. I'm so excited for this next phase of the psychology of your 20s. Remember, full episodes are still available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, wherever you get your podcasts. I can't believe this is going to be the first time I ever say this, but make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to like this episode, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.